Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're excited for this bonus content for this issue of Science of Rowing. For this episode, I wanted to bring on my psychology guy, Frank Clayton, because he is my go-to for all and every question on psychology. I just wanted to give a quick intro and then hand it over to Frank to tell you more about himself. But Frank Clayton's been the varsity women's performance coach for the last 7 years. He's a certified personal trainer with multiple certifications through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And most importantly for this discussion, he has a master's of science in performance psychology.
Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you for the intro. Um, Definitely excited to be here and to do this and to, as I expand, my organization, Accelerated Results Coaching, and really getting down into the work of how we perform, why we perform, from the neck up, how it affects our performance all the way around. So I'm excited to be able to do that and be here.
Yeah, Frank, I was telling Frank that I finally got around to watching his interview with US Rowing, and apologize for taking so long because it's been what, 2 months, 3 months?
December, yeah, December.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But Frank talked about training the whole athlete. And to me, one of the coolest parts about the presentation was that he went into how it was much more about the physical. And when I was doing this research article, it was really interesting because this was a 2020 study, so it's brand new. And they said that there's very little research on this, and that this is actually the second study on motivation and the relationship to rowing. So there's so many studies on the physical, and everyone focuses on the physical so much, and we never think about above the neck. So this was a good opportunity to bring you on and discuss some of this and some of the strategies that you might use to approach with different athletes.
yeah. I definitely focus on the mental aspects of the physical a whole lot more because it's funny, right? It's the old adage that we say sports is 90% mental, 10% physical, right? That's at least when I was coming up, that was the thing that we said a lot, and it dawned on me that that's saying, and most of us has bought into it. Yet and still, we spend 90% of our time working on the physical and about 10% of our time working on our mental performance, if that. Like, even if that, if 10% is enough. So it dawned on me that we can get so much more out of the physical by focusing on a lot of the mental functions that go into our performance as athletes.
Awesome. So let me lay a little bit of groundwork for the study in case people haven't read it yet. We won't spend too much time here, but I'm going to read my executive summary from the study. So researchers examined motivation behaviors and their impact on the long-term success of 65 high-level youth rowers. Over the course of 2.5 years, really long study, which was cool, researchers found that the highly motivated rowers, and this is what they classified them as, the highly motivated rowers were more likely to possess better erg times and participate in higher levels of competition. Researchers found on the flip side that the ambitionless and unmotivated, again, this is what the researchers classified them as, participated in lower levels of competition or had quit the sport by the end of the study. So a stark comparison between groups. Um, and my conclusion was that a rower's motivation level may be associated with the long-term success in their sport of rowing. And these findings should encourage coaches to utilize a flexible coaching style that can adjust to best fit the individual, because we're not working with just the same athlete over and over again. Researchers classified rowers into 5 different motivation styles or behaviors. One was ambitionless, which we already talked about this briefly off the recording. I hate that they called anybody ambitionless, because that's we could get into that. But what that said to the researchers was that they had low ambition scores, which meant that they weren't motivated by winning, at least in rowing. And then you had reactive, which meant they had low scores in proactivity, which basically meant that they didn't actively seek out extra training. After that, you had the uncommitted, which had low scores in commitment, which meant they weren't determined to improve to the same extent as others. Unmotivated, they had low scores in all categories. And then the highly motivated had high scores in all categories. So again, the highly motivated who had the high scores in all categories had the best rowing performance and competition level. And the ambitionless was on the flip side of that, where they had the highest dropout rates and the lowest performance.
Right.
So Frank, when you think about athletes that you've coached or are coaching, do you see these different buckets of motivation styles? Are we missing any, or are we completely missing the boat when we're looking at these categories?
It's interesting that the categories are broken up like that, and right. And people, we are in in a we're just dynamic as individuals, and so to be able to categorize folks is a struggle within itself. But yeah, I definitely see where someone is, and I think of it as a spectrum. I can see where someone is on the spectrum pretty quickly, based on some of the attitudes and the desire to do certain tasks or perform certain workouts and things like that. So you can kind of tell for the most part where folks are, but definitely see the spectrum of athletes from motivated to unmotivated when you when they first get there.
Would you ever go as far as throwing someone into like the ambitionless bucket?
I would go. I don't know. See, all areas no, but definitely in
Put you on
rowing,
the
yes.
spot.
Right, definitely in rowing less, yes. Right, if it's we're looking at ambition as the and winning as the benchmark for that ambition, then yes, definitely, definitely, definitely. To the point, sometimes it's like I'm only here so I look what Marshawn say. I'm only here so I don't get fined. Uh, right, definitely got some athletes that show up. Like my parent told me to do this, uh, and so that's why I'm here, and I'm going to do the bare minimum to not get yelled at. So for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, no, and I remember coaching athletes like that too. I think what kind of turned me off about that classification, and maybe this is just how they classify it in uh, psychology research, but I was just kind of like, okay, they don't care about winning. Like, I would never say that they're ambitionless because they don't care about winning, you
Correct.
know?
Right. Correct. I think that is a fair assessment of, and like that's what I said. Like if it has to be like if ambition, if winning is the pinnacle of ambition, then yes. But other than that, yeah, I wouldn't. Maybe there wasn't a better term for to use.
Looking back at your athletes that you've coached, do you think we're missing any of these categories? Is there additional categories, or does this kind of cover everything?
I don't think. I mean, like I said, I think it's a spectrum. I think there's always right. It's kind of like with anything. There's really like three types. There's the people who know their who they are and how good they are and what they can do, and it's the people who don't know who they are or who aren't what others want them to be, and they know that. And then there's the ones who don't really know how good they are, and they have the opportunity to be awakened to that greatness. So I think that these categories, for the sake of the study, are thorough for the most part. Um, but again, there's a spectrum. There could have been easily 10 categories that they used and added because, like you said, ambitious lists can be broken down. It can be, just, you know, um, if they're not motivated by winning, there could have been, are they motivated by improving? Like, are they motivated by, um, making it through the season? Things like that. So I think,
So this research shows that motivation styles have a significant impact on performance, competitive success, and dropout rate. Do you see real life examples of this? So take an ambitionless rower and a highly motivated rower. Do you see real life examples of this actually happening in terms of performance? Do you see the opposite happening?
the yeah, sometimes being highly motivated can backfire. Depending on what that motivation, where that motivation is placed. From a team perspective, definitely. Everybody got that person that just doesn't know how to turn it off or can't read the situation, and it's like always on 400, 500. Uh, so from that perspective, yes. And then from the other perspective, what is going to drive that athlete if it's not winning? And so, you know, all kind of athletes show up. It's really figuring out and plugging into what, and we're all driven by something, right? And we all have a belief, what is driving that motivation, what is driving um, them to show up and not perform. So I think there's always something to uncover for either athlete, especially if they're there. If you're there and you are uncommitted or unambitious and you're still there, there's a reason for that. Just like there's a reason to show up and be super highly motivated. So uncovering that belief or that what's driving that behavior is, I think, is important.
I like that you mentioned that too, because I feel like you can be considered ambitionless in one setting, and you can be considered highly motivated in another setting. So
Yeah.
like maybe that's just not where you care about winning or performing to your peak, right? Maybe you haven't found the sport that gets you to that point, or maybe you just need to be coached a different way.
Yeah, even inside the sport, right? There's different activities that go on, and so uh, you get excited to erg. Some people get excited to erg, and then when they're on the water, it's kind of lackluster, right? The water is cold. It's cold out there. They're not excited about the element change, and so their performance dips when they're out on the water. Or some people are really excited about when it's time to do the weights, right? And not so excited when it's time to erg. So I think that in different settings, you can see that motivation and ambition uh, kind of vary for athlete to athlete as well.
That's an interesting perspective that I never thought of. Um, in terms of the athletes that you've seen, is there anything that sets apart the highest performing athletes in your eyes?
Um, More than anything, I think the athletes that perform the highest that I've had an opportunity to coach um, is having a sense of purpose, right? Having a sense and a reason to be there um, for the most part. And it's a sense and a reason that is internal, it's intrinsic. And so, and that then spurs them to be highly motivated to do all the things, right? Take all the steps to get better, even if they're not the best athlete. If they're there for a reason and a purpose, whether that purpose is to be the best they can be in anything that they do, whether that purpose is to get a good enough score so that they can go to college or the college of their choice because they have a goal or desire beyond that. Whatever that is driving them, they have a purpose behind it. And I've seen athletes who were not the top performers have a sense of purpose and work their way to becoming the best in their position and in their seat. And so, um, yeah, definitely set apart. I would say the purpose and the reason for actually being there and doing it.
That's awesome. I mean, one of the things this study found was that the highly motivated group actually didn't start with the highest performance, but they ended with the highest performance and the highest competitive levels. So I'm guessing some of the people in there are examples of what you said. Like they had a goal, they were determined, and they had that focus. On the flip side of that, do you see any sort of style or behavior that stands out with less competitive rowers?
For less competitive, there's a couple that can, that are pretty easy to identify. Like I said, for the flip side of the most ambitious and the most motivated having that sense of purpose, the ones who tend to perform lowest don't have that sense of purpose or don't have a real reason driving them around their performance or being there. And then there's other factors like some people just feel like if they succeed others will fail, right? That winning is a competition, of course, but for them to be successful, that means someone has to lose. And do I, right? Does my self image allow me to be the type of person that wants another person to lose? Right. So there's a bunch of psychological factors that go into the underperforming, uh, much in the same way that it does for the highly motivated performers.
Awesome. And I mean that comes into life as well, right? What's that referred to, like scarcity principle
Right,
or
right,
something like that?
right.
Um,
There's only so
it,
much to go around.
right. If there's only so much money, then I'm not going to want to get better or contribute to sharing my information with other people. I'm just going to try to hoard everything, and then it ends up not coming towards you, right?
Right.
Research always seems to segment things into kind of black and white, and I think it's because it makes it more simple as research because they're trying to prove a point.
Right.
Um, but are these motivation styles really this cut and dry, or are they more or are they more flexible? Um, I think one of the things that stood out to me about this study was that it was 2.5 years.
Mm.
And at the beginning of that 2.5 years, they said, okay, you're highly motivated and you're ambitionless. Let's see how that works out over the 2.5 years. And my opinion is it's not so black and white. And maybe they got a new coach, or maybe they grew up,
Right.
or like something may have changed. What's your perspective on styles being innate or flexible, etc.?
Well, I think again that where research sometimes can be tough is that black and white because we're such dynamic creatures. Like you said, over that 2.5 year period of time, who's the same? Like I know I'm not the same two and a half that I was 2.5 years ago, and so um, the challenge that the study has is that it doesn't identify the change in that individual athlete that could have possibly taken place that contributed to that changed them into at the end of the study was if you were in that unmotivated group, are you still in that unmotivated group? Who's to say? I don't think they really measured that well, or at least it didn't mention that in the study, from what I understood. Uh, and so, yeah, I think those, like again, purpose, what's driving us, uh, your belief of why you there, what can be accomplished, all of those things are dynamic and ever changing, and ever moving. So it's hard to kind of pin down and be black and white in these situations. Anything with humans is really hard to be black and white for the most part. So this is no different.
Yeah, and just to give the listeners a little bit more background, they had coaches that ranked their athletes based on their perspectives of their athletes on 10 questions. And then that's what put them into these categories. But Frank, to your point earlier, you're like, well, some people are motivated by the erg, some people are motivated by the
Right.
water, and it can vary. So that's an example of all those dynamic situations as well.
And it's
So
subjected to the coach's perspective of like there was no criteria of like no set criteria that went across the board. And so your perception of an athlete comes into play. If for the highly motivated, if they did all these tasks and another athlete didn't do all these tasks, maybe that athlete was doing another task very efficiently, was putting the boat back, was, all of those things, and they didn't value the task that they set as measured as high, then that affects the rate and score that I believe they would have given them.
yeah, and the coach rating scale that they use for this study is pretty new. I believe it came out in 2019.
Okay.
Um, and it's been supported by a couple of studies showing that it's pretty successful at adequately categorizing them. But then who's to say it's adequate? Because how do we really know this person, this dynamic
Right.
individual, right? Yeah.
It's not long enough
Um,
period of time. I don't, at least in my opinion, I don't think it's a long enough period of time to, uh, in a number of a breadth of this breadth of story or research that it's in. I'm not sure, but that's
yeah, no, I agree. I agree. It's a limitation, and we're all we all have our own biases, and we all have our favorite athletes, whether we like to say it or not. Um, so we're probably going to rank our favorite athletes on a different scale, and that's based on our goals as a coach, right?
right.
It would be easy to take this research and say, okay, highly motivated perform better, so I'm only going to go out and recruit people who are highly motivated,
Right.
and I'm gonna cut the rest. Um, but I feel like it's harder but also better to look at it as a challenge and say, okay, this is the athlete that I have in front of me at this moment. And maybe they currently have this motivation style. Regardless of where they're starting, how can I coach them differently to meet their current behavior? Right. Like, I think that's a lot more valuable. What do you think?
Correct. I think that what the research shows is if we take the research at face value and it says the highly motivated are the most successful, then the opportunity as a coach is how do I take an athlete from where they are and get them to be highly motivated? Um, how do I mine what's important to them? How do I dig that out and present that as the carrot, right? As the ambition, as opposed to setting uh, as the standard for ambition, as opposed to setting just a general standard for the entire team. And then you get the most out of that particular player because or athlete, because I do believe there's a way. As a coach, it's our job to get folks to be performers, right? It's our job to put them in the best position to be their best. And so I think that if highly motivated is the category that shows up as the best performers, then what's the strategy to move any athlete, regardless of where their level is, to highly motivated?
Awesome. Good perspective. Um, so I'm going to quickly remind you guys of the motivation styles. And then I was hoping we could just kind of say, okay, if it is that cut and dry,
Mhm.
how might you approach this individual athlete to try to move them towards that more highly motivated category? So let's start what's considered to be the bottom, which is ambitionless. So they were defined as ambitionless if they answered 4 questions that ranked them low in that category, which basically meant that they were not motivated by winning. So you have an athlete in front of you, motivating them to win is not going to make them better. How would you approach this athlete?
So that's the athlete that you really have to dig into and figure out what gets them going. What gets them going, and that takes questions, right? Really asking them questions about not about why you don't want to win, right? But questions about what gets them fired up. And then that is what you use as their um, driving factor to perform. And winning will be a result. See, we forget that winning is not the goal. Winning is the result of the goal. So then we can then redefine the goal for that athlete, right? And then winning has an opportunity to be the result.
Yes, I love that you flipped it that way. A way I looked at it too was I felt like winning's not the only definition of success,
Correct.
right? Like you mentioned earlier, like maybe they're there for different reasons, right? So if I'm looking at a athlete who's not motivated by winning, like you, I'm asking questions and trying to figure out what does motivate them. Um, and then once you figure out why they're motivated, what do you how would you approach that? Do you kind of use it as a carrot? What's your perspective on that?
Well, as a coach, I'm always kind of, like I said, asking questions because they know the answers. They know the answers. Sometimes we just don't ask the right questions, and so asking a appropriate number of questions and the right questions, so that they can answer, and that answer will drive them towards whatever outcome that they want. So really being curious and asking appropriate questions as a coach, and then again reminding them, keeping them focused on what it is that they want to accomplish.
So that kind of goes back to the fact that you thought your best performing athletes always had a purpose, right? They had a
Right.
purpose, they had a goal. So we're asking questions to better understand them as an athlete, but we're also helping them understand themselves better, or at least get it more in their mind. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because awareness is the first step. All right, always awareness is the first step to changing one state to the next. And so, and if they have a desire to stay there where they are, performing how they are, then we want to investigate that as well.
Let's move on to the reactive athlete. So these are the athletes that didn't actively seek out extra training. And one of the interesting things about this coupling of athletes was that they only ranked low in one category,
Right.
and they had pretty good performance throughout, but they never really like passed through that ceiling of performance. Um, and all it was is they didn't actively seek out extra training or ask their coaches for extra training. How might you approach this athlete?
So these are the athletes that I think, I don't want to say do the bare minimum, but these are the athletes who require a little extra encouragement, right? They require a little extra push, and they will rise to the level at which you push them, but nothing beyond that. And so, knowing that uh, as a coach, you give them more once you realize, like, uh, oh, you can handle more and you can carry more, but you're not necessarily going to ask for it. And so it's funny because when you say reactive, I almost put this group in the 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 ambitiousless category, right? If Because ambition for me is like, I have a reason for seeking something. So the reactive athlete, I think, does the work and will do whatever you give them, but will never initiate any type of uh, anything past that. So I would just give them more, give them what they can handle, and then some.
Awesome. Yeah, I was thinking like, okay, I remember these athletes. They come to practice right on time. They do the work. Nothing wrong with that. But they never be early. They never stay late. They never do the extra work, or they never ask to make up work. Right. Um, so yeah, like you said, like giving them more attention, um, and maybe giving them opportunities to put in extra work because maybe they don't even know it's an opportunity. Like I remember coaching in high school, and you probably see this too. A lot of times it's a schedule issue. So maybe it's not that they don't want to do extra work. Maybe this is all they have time to do because it's already so time consuming.
Right, right. And it's, I've had plenty of, especially on the women's team, working with the women's team, had plenty of girls who have just so much on their plate. And then, they show up to practice, and there's times where uh, you know, they're not stretching, they're kind of hanging around, and it's not that they're not motivated. It's like, oh, we forgot to tell them to make sure during this time to stretch. And once you tell them, it's like, oh, they're doing it and they're doing it well. But as coaches, we got to make sure that we're we're instructing, um, so that athletes know what is expected of them.
I mean, we see everything through our own lens, right? So if we were the athlete that came and just did the warm up because we knew that it was supposed to happen, and we just expect our athletes to think that, we're probably just going to get angry.
Right.
um, let's move on to the uncommitted. So the uncommitted was clustered really close to reactive in terms of performance. They were only missing one category, which was the commitment category. And this category was not as clearly defined as the other two. Um, but my summary of it was that these are athletes that weren't as determined to improve. Um, what would you do with athletes that don't necessarily push themselves or seem to drive themselves as well, or align themselves like with the best athletes on the team?
Yeah, it was interesting because this was in the study. What I summarized for this. This was the group that when it got hard, it was like, oh, that's enough. Um, from what I read and my take on the committed, like they weren't really ready to push through that wall to go to their absolute max, is what it seemed like.
Yeah,
Um,
you're sorry, you're correct. It's one of the questions for this category was, were they able to push until exhaustion?
right. And so when you get an athlete like that, this probably is more better classified as the bare minimum athlete, that will that usually rest on talent, right? This is that athlete who's like naturally got all the things, right? And we see them all the time. They kind of like they get we as coaches we sometimes can uh uh do more harm than good because we see their talent, and when they get a little pass, especially if they're really good, right? If they're really good, they can kind of show up and do uh 80% effort, and their 80% is better than 90% of the team's 100% effort. And so that athlete has to be kind of pushed and pronged a little more. I don't know about prong. That's a little extreme, but it has to be a little more motivation for them to kind of push past. But giving them again, it's all about what they believe. And if you get an athlete in football, you see this a lot, man. Wide receivers show up. At least I did. I had a couple of wide receivers show up and just believed that they were God's gift to the game, right? And would not push themselves to get better. And so, sometimes you have to humble these athletes. So, an athlete like that, the way you make them work harder or commit to exhausting themselves you exalt those who do, right? So you take them off of their pedestal and put those who do up on a pedestal, and that has the potential to ground them in reality. Like, oh, I may have to do better in order to hold on to this spot. So, even though you may not ever think of taking them out of that stroke seat, but it's like, oh, John, she's working harder than you. I think they might get you this week. It might be a way to motivate that athlete.
Nice. And taking the kind of setting the goals for the athletes in terms of like what's more important to the coach, performance or hard work,
Right.
right? Um, I'm glad you touched on that because the uncommitted actually started with the best performance and then they kind of dropped throughout
Right.
the study. They stayed about in the middle, but they did not end up being the highest performing group. Um, Unmotivated. So this was the second lowest group. And they were scored low by their coaches in all categories:
Right.
ambition, commitment, and proactivity. How do you target this athlete?
Um, Again, you got to figure out what motivates them, right? Because we're the motivated intrinsically or extrinsically. So there may be some extrinsic motivations that you can provide for those athletes to move them in uh, to at least that ambition category, right? Because if they're not motivated by winning, they may be motivated by something else just to get a little more out of them. So figuring out I the unmotivated, right, is one of those, like you said, like you don't really like the ambitionless category title. I don't really like the unmotivated because we're all motivated by something. It's just figuring out what that thing is and presenting it and put it in front of that athlete. Um, and then, once you figure out what it is, then, it's I think it's really not easy, but it's a lot easier for you as a coach to then move them from that unmotivated category.
Yeah, with this one, so reactive and uncommitted, they were only missing one of the three categories. This is missing all the categories. So it's almost like you're filling all buckets, right? So you're
Right.
kind of taking the approach from the reactive and the approach from the uncommitted to fill those buckets and see how you can get that one going, but maybe more challenging because they have lower scores in all of them.
Right.
Um, Last, I still wanted to touch on the highest performing group. So some people might be like, there's nothing wrong. Let's not even talk about it. But I feel like there's also different treatment for the highly performing rowers.
Right.
So these are the ones that scored high in all categories. And they also ended with the best performance, lowest dropout rates, and highest level of competition. How would you handle these athletes?
So these are the athletes, right? To keep them motivated, you always got to keep raising the bar. Um, and you have to raise the bar high enough, right? We think about um, if you are, when I was when I was younger, I used to always want to touch the backboard, right? And always run and try to touch the backboard. And a lot of folks do. You when you're younger and you're running, try to touch that backboard, and it's right there, and you keep jumping up. Once you hit it, boop, right? Touching the backboard is not that hot anymore, right? Then you move on to okay, now I got to grab the rim, right? Or touch the rim, nick the rings of the rim with my finger. So you always keep raising the bar for those highly motivated athletes because they need that. We seek to, um, as individuals, as humans, we seek to meet that next challenge, right? Strength training, right? Once you hit 225, it's like, oh, okay, next week I got 230, right? You up the weight, or you do more reps, or there's always that next thing. So keeping the highly motivated is by raising that bar, setting sights on something greater and higher. And then sometimes on the flip side of that, right, sometimes you may have to humble them because highly motivated and you have success can sometimes dampen that motivation, right? We've seen it in so many sports over and over again where a team has success and they come in overconfident, and then next thing you know, competition shows up. And so being mindful, being wary, always raising the bar for those highly motivated, and then making sure you have a damper that keeps them kind of in that pocket and hungry.
Awesome answer. That made me think of a couple things. So I specifically remember having years where I had really highly motivated athletes. Like they fit the bill to what we explained today. And they were the top performer in the group. And they were so much better than the rest of the team that they had trouble continuing to raise that
Right.
bar or reach for the rim. Um, Say you have that scenario. Does that bring anything to mind in terms of how you might manage that situation?
Yeah, just really laying out, um, what they've accomplished, right? It's kind of like the what they say, the sandwich technique, right? We're gonna lay out what you have accomplished so far, how good you are, give you that praise, but then we're gonna identify those areas where you can get better at, right? And then we're gonna identify, right, to finish that sandwich on how we can, what can we do to get you there. And so now you have this little piece in the middle, right, that they're really focused on like, oh yeah, I haven't done that, or I haven't reached that. I thought I was really good. And so creating that sandwich, I think strategy is really good for those type of athletes.
Nice. Yeah, I immediately just use that example with the athlete that's in my head, and I think that would work. So
Yeah.
that's awesome advice. Um, and the researchers touched on this, and I thought of this as well because I'm always trying to keep athletes healthy and avoid injury. Um, the highly motivated put in extra work. They're super determined. They have a goal. They're the best performers. Do we need to be worried about the amount of work they put in? Do we ever have to pull them back? Do you have examples of that, or a way that you might approach that?
Yeah, sometimes with the highly motivated too. Well, there's two things that come to mind when I think about that. I think about like in a team atmosphere, the highly motivated can sometimes be a turnoff to other athletes. So really focusing, how do we use that motivated energy in the way that works best for the team? Because you can get folks coming in too pumped up and alienate themselves, and so want to make sure that everything is balanced, and that comes when it comes to training as well, right? You don't want to overtrain. You want to be trained optimally, not overtly. And so if it requires if you're trying to lift as heavy as you can every day, this, like, yeah, you did your max yesterday, but why do it again today? Like, you haven't had a chance to recover. And so I think balance is the way to think about uh, dealing with, that a challenge of overtraining. Making sure that recovery is part of the process, and let that be known, and let it's an important part of the process. It's not wasting times. It's part of it. And so inactivity is activity in that sense.
Nice. Yeah. So educating on the recovery side and letting them know that it is contributing to their goal could be pretty beneficial. I wanted to bring something up from your U.S. running presentation that I just thought of. Um, you spent a slide or two talking about teaching athletes to be present.
Mhm.
I wonder if using kind of strategies that you mentioned in that presentation for highly motivated might be beneficial, because I feel like they're just like a workhorse and they're never actually present. They're just working, 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 and they're going towards that goal. And sometimes they might need to slow down. Do you think that makes sense? And if so, do you want to share some of those strategies?
Yeah, just being present, right? Even with a highly motivated, because usually the highly motivated lives in the future. Uh, and so, they're always striving towards that goal. But again, uh, with something like presenting the idea over training, getting them to be present and have that conversation of and understanding why that it's important not to overtrain, and that includes the your mental faculties, right? You want to reset and be focused and present. And so just just as an athlete, being in your body um before you get on the erg, or when you're learning a new lift and a technique, slowing down so that you get rid of all the noise, right, that our mind has, to be able to really pay attention to the little signals and signs that our body gives us. Folks have probably can testify to this, that there's sometimes when you have a ache that you've had all day and you never really notice it until you sit down and stop moving. And you're like, oh, my shoulder has been hurting like the whole day. And I just kind of like didn't pay any attention to it. And so this value in getting those highly motivated athletes to slow down and being in your body. And that may be one of those strategies to say, hey, this is actually going to make you better because you're going to be able to identify this and do this better, because right, they're always motivated by better.
I don't know if you watched that series on Michael Jordan that came out back in like March or April,
Yeah, like
but
five
like,
times.
yeah, so good. But Phil Jackson had a hard time getting Michael Jordan and some of the other guys to calm down and work on being present and to meditate, right? But eventually he got them to meditate, and they ended up being the best team in the league for what, 5 seasons?
Right.
Um, or no, six. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they had
six.
six
Yeah,
championships.
six.
Yeah, so I mean, most time rowers don't know basketball, but um, I think it's I think it's normal for highly motivated athletes, like Michael Jordan's a great example, um, to not be so present and to eventually, or to push back against their coach about like concepts like that. So I think if a coach is trying to teach an athlete like an athlete this idea, I think patience is key, because it's literally happened at the highest
Right.
levels,
Right.
right?
And providing examples is always good to do as well.
All right, so those were my questions that I thought you might be able to help clarify on this study. Was there anything that stood out to you, or anything in addition that you'd like to mention that this study made you think about?
I just really think about that category, right? The reactive, like how much opportunity is to for that group to identify that group in your coaching and my coaching, like that, and never, right? You assume sometimes you can assume that uh, that an athlete just doesn't want to do the work, and so you never ask. And so that group right there was really interesting, that they were right there on the cusp of having top performances. And so it reminded me to be mindful of if I was addressing those athletes in the group, because it's easy to identify the ambitious list and the highly motivated, but that reactive group, can sometimes just blend in.
Totally. And there does seem to be so much potential in that group. And if we can identify and actually push them to that next level, imagine how much better our team might be.
Right. Because to me, that's the bulk of, it's almost the bulk of the team. Um, and so, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I like that you said that. I feel like it's kind of a bell chart, right? Like
right.
highly motivated is on one end, ambitionless is on the other, and then most people are probably in that middle. So how do you make your team better? You probably work at the bottom, you probably work at the middle, which transitions me into the what I wanted to bring up next. So one of the biggest things that stood out to me about your presentation with US rowing was your flower analogy.
Mhm.
So I'll let you explain it, but um, you basically said don't neglect the roots.
Right.
And I'll leave it there for you to pick up.
Yeah, so definitely one of the things about being on a big team, right? Being a part of a big team is that you have the benefit of pushing up the top, right? And so what I mean by don't neglect the roots and the flower analogy of the team is, those highly motivated athletes are the petals, right? They're the top, like they're going to get a lot of external attention, right? They get the pats on the back when they get off the water, the crowd cheers for them. And so, as a coach, you don't necessarily have to do as much um, for most of those athletes, right? They can kind of live off the glory of being the top, right? Then you have those reactive athletes in the middle who are like the stems, right? They're the stems, they're the leaves. They're kind of there, they're supporting, and you can see them. They don't get as much praise, but they're pretty close to the top, and it's easy to push them up. But those roots are the ones that you don't really get to see, right? They are the unmotivated, they are the ambitionless, they are the ones that are at the so-called bottom of the chart. And so, but they are also the ones that who are supporting those petals. And so the more stronger you can make the roots, the more that they are challenging those petals to be petals, right? If you got a athlete that's in your third boat and their split is, a tenth of a second slower than your top boat, then that's going to motivate those pedals to get to work. And so you don't want to neglect the roots, and you don't want to neglect the roots for team morale, right? You want everybody to feel a part of the flower. Everybody is important, and so in that sense, they're even more important because you want your team morale ideally to be succinct throughout the your organization. And so if someone that's how you grow your organization, because people want to be seen, respected, heard, right? And so if you can make an athlete who has no chance, no athletic talent, no ability uh, to, at least on the forefront, the lowest ability to be successful in the sport, feel valued, seen, and heard, and supported, then everybody's going to flock to your organization. And so that's what I mean by you cannot neglect the roots, and you want to treat your team as a flower.
Awesome. Love that. I'm not going to add much to that because I think that was a great way to end. But I did want to give you an opportunity to plug or tell people where they can contact you. I know you have some things in the works. I don't know if you want to share or not, but anything you want to share or talk about what you're doing or any contact information, we can put people in touch with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, like I said, working on accelerated results coaching. So, this is a platform to help coaches and athletes better understand their performance. And I use a performance wheel, right, that works on your belief around who you are as an athlete, how your beliefs and your mindset and all of that play into your performance, and push your practice and ultimately gives you results. So accelerated coaching results, and we're doing a great workout, some great workouts and things like that virtually right now to help support coaches who are having trouble doing land workouts, right, and things like that. And so you can definitely follow me on Instagram at Strength Rowing Coach. on Instagram, and also you can follow the art performance page at a.r.c.academy. So it's we are going to have a monthly subscription, but also 6 to 8 week academies for rowers who would like to do better, right? So we're looking for those reactive rowers. We're looking for those unmotivated rowers, right? We want to make sure that if you would like to be successful in this sport, or right now this sport, but eventually any other, that we are able to help you identify ways to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it. We will put links and everything in the show notes so people can find that easily. But um, thank you, Frank. I appreciate you coming on and spending your time and finding time away from the kids. I know is hard.
Man,
So thanks.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate everything that Science is Rolling is doing. You guys are doing great work. So I'm super excited for the growth of it, and for everything that you share with the community as in a whole.